It's a Wednesday, and that means it's time for the loading zone. Let's get loaded. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the loading zone. My name is Rabauna Naming, your financial advisor. Quick disclaimer as per usual, these videos do not constitute financial advice and should therefore not be seen or treated as such. For adequate and holistic advice, please seek the counsel of a registered financial advisor or hit me up in my professional capacity. Who knows, it may save you some money. Thank you to everyone who's been checking these videos out. If it's the first time joining us, welcome. Where have you been? I drop a video every Wednesday on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. With that said, let's get right into today's episode. Today, I want to continue on our topic of choosing a fund and specifically focusing on past performance. As mentioned last week, every bit of information you're going to need about a fund is found in a fund fact sheet. Within this fund fact sheet, there'll also be a section on how the fund has actually performed. This section will show how the fund has performed over various periods or intervals. It will show the performance of this fund over a 12-month period, a 3-year period, 5-year, 10 years, etc. It'll also show the performance of this fund since its inception or launch, meaning since the day that the fund was actually started. So if you're going into a fund that was launched in the 90s, it'll show the average growth of this fund since its inception date. Please note that I said average. I found that sometimes when I say average growth to a client, I would be confusing them as to what I'm actually referring to. So maybe let me break it down this way. My son, who's in grade 1, got his report card a couple of months ago, and next to each subject there was a mark, but next to that mark there was a class average. This class average serves to show us roughly where everybody else in class is actually performing. So the teacher would basically add up all the marks of each student for each subject and then divide it by the number of the students to arrive to the average of this class. The same principles apply when looking at a fund fact sheet with regard to past performance. Very few funds would actually show you how the fund has performed each year. It's usually the funds that were incepted not too long ago. So we've established in previous videos that the different asset classes within this fund will fluctuate, and as a result, the entire fund as a whole will also fluctuate. So this average performance would be how the fund has roughly performed over the different periods, taking into account that each year's performance has fluctuated. I really hope I haven't lost you. Please rewind if I have. Just know that this is roughly how the fund has performed on average over that particular period. 3 years, for example. Alright, so there'll be different periods as mentioned before of the performance of this fund. 1 year would be what the average return has been over the past 12 months. 3 years will be what the average return has been over the past 3 years. It goes on and on all the way up until the launch date or the inception date or the day this fund was actually formed. Some funds will show the cumulative performance of the fund. Score cumulative. Don't let English abuse you. This is the total sum of how the fund has actually performed over the respective period. Say over a 5-year period, it would be 30% for argument's sake, meaning over that period, you would have accumulated 30% return on your initial investment. In this section of performance, one other thing that one needs to take into account is something called the benchmark. Benchmark in layman's terms can be what the target of this fund actually is. It's a way the fund manager assesses how well they are doing and also to track whether they are able to actually reach the goals that they have preset. This benchmark is usually right next to the average performance. It's important to not only look at the performance of this fund in isolation, but to also take into account the benchmark or the target of this fund. A good fund is a fund that consistently outperforms the benchmark. A great fund, on the other hand, is a fund that consistently outperforms the benchmark with a bigger margin. It's also imperative to note that past performance is only what the fund has done previously and does not serve as a guideline or an indication of how the fund will perform in the future. If you're a football fan, maybe you'll understand it in this manner. Just because Kaizer Chiefs beat Orlando Pirates the last time they played does not mean that Kaizer Chiefs will beat Orlando Pirates the next time they play. Just like in football, the same thing applies when looking at a fun fact sheet. Past performance is not an indication of future performance. It merely serves as a guide to indicate or illustrate the potential of this particular fund. In the same breath, a fun fact sheet that has bad past performance does not mean that it will continue in the same trajectory. Oftentimes, the economic factors that made it perform badly at that point in time may not arise in the future as well. Think of it this way. During 2008, 2009, if memory serves me well, we were going through a global recession, the credit crunch. Some funds were not performing so well during this period. So had you been looking at the wrong fund that wasn't doing so well, you may have thought that it will continue performing this way. But that was not the case with most funds actually. So past performance should never be looked at on its own in isolation. The best thing to do when looking at past performance is look at funds in the same category that have the same or similar mandate and compare the performance of the two. We've come to the end of today's episode, but there are 3 key things that I want you to take away from today. Always compare your past performance with your benchmark. Compare the performance of a fund with another competing fund. Just make sure that they are similar or close, or they are categorized in the same category. Remember risk profiling that we spoke about last week? Make sure they're in the same risk profile. And lastly, which is probably the most important, past performance is not an indication of future performance. Kaizer Chiefs will not always beat Orlando Pirates. That's it for me today. Thank you for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your week. Stay safe and be blessed.